Hi, welcome to the Bhagavad-gita in a Year podcast. I'm here with Radha and Charan and Balaram, and we are going to study this Bhagavad-gita. We're gonna study it for about 20, maybe 30 minutes a day, and with the goal of getting through the whole thing in a year. So Cece is going to be our fearless leader in taking us through it. And today we're going to start from the very beginning. Right? So that's where we're going to start, Cece, at chapter 1,
Yes.
text 1.
Yes.
Great.
I'm delighted to be here with all of you. And Balram is also here. He's based in Atlanta in the ashram there. He's traveling currently. So let's begin. The first text. The Dhritarashtra vacha dharma kshetre kurukshetre samaveta yuyutsavaha mamakaha pandavaschaiva kimakurvata sanjaya.
Translation. Dhritarashtra said, O Sanjaya, after my sons and the sons of Pandu assembled in the place of pilgrimage at Kurukshetra, desiring to fight, what did they do?
So let's start with some fundamentals about the Bhagavad-gita. That the Bhagavad-gita, I'll try to structure this in terms of 6 questions. What, when, where, why, who, and how. So we'll try to discuss these six questions today in the first verse of the Bhagavad-gita. So what is the Bhagavad-gita if you consider that? So literally the word Bhagavad-gita, Gita means song. Bhagavad is a variant of the word Bhagavan, which means God or the ultimate reality. So this is often called God's song. That's one of the song of God, or God's song is a simple translation of the word Bhagavad Gita. More precisely, we could say it's a philosophical treatise in the form of poetry. And coming from Krishna, who in the tradition is considered to be God. So that is, now the Bhagavad Gita is itself 700 texts. This is 700 texts. In Sanskrit, the texts are also called, or in poetry, they can also be called as verses. And it is spoken in a language, Sanskrit, which is the language in which majority of the yoga texts from the East in India have been written. And this is considered the sacred language, not just a sacred language, but it's considered a language through which the divine human connection is established. In Sanskrit itself, this is Deva Bhasha. So the language of the gods. It's spoken in this language, and the Gita addresses many questions. But the key question is about the right thing to do.
Can I ask a question real quick, Cece?
Yeah, please go ahead, please.
Sometimes people will ask me here, like, is the Gita like the Bible, like the Hindu Bible? How would you respond to that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was going to come to that, but good you brought this up. So is the Gita the Hindu Bible? Well, you could say yes and no. Yes, in the sense that if we want to consider which is the most influential text of the particular religious tradition, which we now know as Hinduism, and then we could say the Gita is most influential. But at the same time, if we consider the broad Vedic tradition, there are many books within it. So first is that there are many sacred books. So in that sense, there is no one book which is considered absolutely authoritative. Another thing is that the Gita's mood and tone are very different. I'll talk about this a little bit more, but here the mood is more of analysis and question answers. It's not so much of giving directions about having faith or believing. Faith is a part of this, but it's much more about analysis and question answers. So there are no commandments here. The mood of the Gita is analysis about choices and consequences. These are your options, and this is what will happen to you when you follow these options. So in terms of the mood and its overall tone, it's significantly different. And we could say that it has been presented by some within the tradition as well as seen by some outside the tradition. So if we consider this to be the tradition, so some people do consider it to be the Hindu Bible, but I would say that it's a comparison with some qualifications. Does that address your point?
Yeah, okay. So it is in a sense that it's very influential text, and it's spoken by Krishna, which is what the Hindus name for God. So yes. It is a very sacred book, but there are lots of sacred books in India. But it is one of the primary ones. That's how I would respond if a family member asked me. Would that be correct?
Yeah, sure.
To say? Okay.
So within the tradition, the Gita would be a central book. So I like the way you put it. It's a very influential. Is it the most influential? Well, it depends. Certainly in today's world, the Gita is considered to be a central book of the broad Vedic canon of books. So just to continue this thread of thought, this is now the Gita, this tradition which is there. Roughly today it is known as Hinduism, but the name Hindu is not used within the tradition itself, or it has not been traditionally used. It is sometimes called as the Vedic tradition because it is based on the body of texts called the Vedas. And it's not just a text, it's a library or body of texts. So it can be called as the Vedic tradition. It is also called sometimes as the Sanatan tradition. Sanatan refers to unending, everlasting, unbounded. So it refers to the teachings within this tradition are considered to be universal. And that's why that word is also used. And the Gita is considered a central book among those traditions. I don't want to, among this tradition or this family of traditions, right? I don't want to bombard with too many terms. But yes, it is a book which is, you could say, venerated by at least 1 billion people. So it is it is considered sacred by more than 1 billion Hindus are there, and many others also. And more than billion actually. And it has been also talked about positively by many thinkers from America. We have Henry David Thoreau, and we have Emerson, we have Huxley. And then recently in the movies, we have had Oppenheimer, and he has been quoted the Bible. He's quoted the Bhagavad-gita. You got me confused now. So of course, from India, many thinkers, Gandhi quoted the Bible, Bhagavad-gita, he considered to be the primary guidebook of his life. And so in that sense, many influential people have also, apart from the sheer number of people, many influential people have also studied the Bhagavad-gita and appreciated it, found wisdom within it. And these include people from a wide spectrum. There have been philosophers, there have been poets, there have been scientists, there have been diplomats. So a wide spectrum of people have found Gita's wisdom. These are all thinkers of various backgrounds. So it is when we consider Bhagavad Gita, before we go into its content specifically, what is it? It's a hugely influential book, which within the tradition is considered to be the song of God, and is widely considered to be a wisdom tradition, a book of the wisdom tradition. So the Gita itself calls it a book of yoga wisdom, and every one of its chapters is considered to be one yoga. Now we will delve into the many meanings of the word yoga. So the world often sees the book, so the Gita can be seen as a religious book which is to be venerated, but it is also seen, this is valid, but it's also seen as a wisdom book. Now these two are not non-exclusive, but even if somebody doesn't in any way feel connected with the religious worldview associated with it, there are many who have found enriching wisdom in the Gita, seeing it as a wisdom text itself. So that's the answer to the first question, what?
So it could be one or the other or both. People could see it as religious or wisdom, or they could see it as both.
Yeah, the whole more holistic understanding is it's both. That separation of reason and faith is not so much there in the Vedic tradition. So wisdom texts are considered to be based on reason, and religious texts are considered to be based on faith. But that separation is not so much there within this tradition.
Okay.
Now, if we move on to the next question of when. So now the Gita's dating, like the dating of many things in the broad Vedic tradition, is debatable. So what we do know is that Indian history has been, historians, they often work with a very inadequate data set for many reasons, because India's weather being tropical, manuscripts don't last for very long, and India having been under colonial subjugation for many centuries has had a lot of destruction of its monuments and a lot of impoverishment, because of which there is not much money available. So as per the academic perspective, the Gita is at least, it's more than 2 millennia old. Now it's definitely pre-Christ. Now if you consider from the tradition's perspective, it's more than 5 millennia ago. It was spoken when Krishna descended to the world. So that event is said to happen about 5 millennia ago. And while the date is important from one perspective, but this is a wisdom that does not date. So the date really, so when it is spoken is not as important as what is spoken. So within the tradition itself, put a date on the wisdom, that's important. But much more important is, you could say, this is if I can say this is a greater than sign, much more important than putting a date on the wisdom is to go on a date with wisdom. Make this wisdom as a part of one's life. Immerse oneself in it and learn from it, because ultimately what it talks about are timeless values.
Prabhu, 5 millennia is 5,000. Is that right?
5,000 years ago, yeah.
Okay.
Why is there a discrepancy between academics saying 2,000 and tradition saying 5,000?
Because as I said, the academic data set is inadequate. That there is so much of the monuments have been destroyed by colonial invasions. The Indian weather does not allow manuscripts to be preserved because of the sheer weather being tropical and hot. And also India having, those are the 3 reasons I gave.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you.
So in general, as academic historians are investigating, they are recognizing that the tradition is much older than what they thought. Initially, when the British ruled India, They thought that doors of all doors of history open with start with Greece, with the Greek civilization, and they initially dated the Gita post Christ. But now every single like mainstream scholar acknowledges that the Gita is definitely pre-Christ. So you could say every few decades, the dates of many of the Vedic things in the Vedic tradition are being pushed several centuries backward. So as research comes up, it is quite possible that the tradition's dating will be vindicated.
Okay, because academic it makes its approximations based off of those like existing data, and the tradition is more like an oral, so it's more approximated.
Yeah, the tradition is not just oral; it's oral tradition, but within the tradition itself, there are accounts of when this was spoken.
Okay.
So now, if we continue this question of when from our perspective, but it's also, we can move toward the question of where, which is related with when. That is, this is interestingly spoken on a battlefield. And the Bhagavad-gita itself is, while it's a book of immense value, its 700 verses make it of, you could say, immensely small volume. So immense value, but it's almost immensely small volume. The whole Bhagavad Gita could be fitted, the verse Sanskrit text could be fitted on the just on the front and back pages of the New York Times.
Wow.
All of the verses together. But such a succinct text has had an immense influence. At the same time, while these 700 texts or verses, well, they are very small, they are part of a huge book, which is known as the Mahabharata. And this Mahabharata has 110,000 verses. 110,000 from the Indian notation, but 110,000 from the Western notation. And this is considered the world's longest poem. Not just the longest poem, it's by far the longest. In fact, it is. The two longest poems in the world are considered Iliad and Odyssey, the Germanic sagas. And these two, you could multiply them, you could add them both and multiply by them as 7, and still the Mahabharata will be greater.
Wow.
So it's a huge book. And that book is also exploring the same theme that the Gita is exploring. So I'll use the word Mahabharata and BG or the Gita to refer to that. Both of these are actually exploring the same theme of dharma. Dharma is, it can be translated many different ways. It can be translated religion. It can be translated as duty. And it's many translations we'll be discussing later on. But it is the right thing to do. So right thing could be in the sense of what is moral or even what is meaningful. What is it that we should do in life that will bring meaning to our life? How can we find meaning in our life? That is the key question that is discussed. So when we are faced with ethical dilemmas, that is, the question is addressed in the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita both. So in that sense, this smaller book is very much an integral part of the bigger book. But the Mahabharata addresses it through narratives. It tells stories, and at certain point the characters face certain dilemmas. And in that process, dharma is discussed. In the Bhagavad Gita, it's more through, not so much through narratives as through analysis, more of philosophical or metaphysical analysis. So the Gita focuses on not telling different characters and what they did at different times. It's one character's dilemma, and it dives deep into that dilemma. So this is the, we could say, I'm answering the question now, where was it spoken? So it is spoken on the battlefield. So now the Mahabharata describes incidents that largely happened in North India. So there's a little there are two families or two cousins within the same family, the Pandavas and the Kauravas. And broadly speaking, when say the Pandavas are the heroes, the Kauravas are the anti-heroes. And the Pandavas try to settle their differences with the Kauravas as amicably as possible. The Kauravas are adamant and evil, and therefore a war breaks out finally. So that war happens at Kurukshetra, and that is where the Bhagavad-gita is spoken, as I mentioned. This is spoken at battlefield at a place named Kurukshetra, and these are the first two words in this verse: so Dharma Kshetre, Kurukshetre. So this is a place where it's a sacred place, and that is the place of the battlefield between these two people, between these two groups of people. And just before that battlefield, before the battle on the battlefield, the Gita's discussion will emerge. So this is about where Kurukshetra is still now a historical place existing in North India, about a few hours from India's capital, Delhi. And it has a place called Jyotisar, where there is a magnificent temple being built at the place which is considered to be the same place where Krishna spoke the Gita. So the place of the Gita is also there. It's considered immensely potent place.
Have you been there?
And so, yeah, I have been there. It's a very nice place to visit. So it's an ideal place where you can recite all the 700 verses of the Bhagavad Gita. You can complete it in a few hours.
Have you done that?
Depending on how fast. Yeah. Mm.
Wow. That's probably a pretty powerful experience, huh?
Oh, very much. So this is the where. If there are any questions, you can discuss. I'll continue otherwise.
So the
Balaram?
Bhagavad Gita, it's like right in the middle of the Mahabharata, and the Mahabharata provides like the pretext to then the conversation between Krishna and Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita.
Perfect. Yes, the Gita is spoken before the climactic war in the Mahabharata. So
I was gonna. Oh, are you done?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I was gonna ask, like, because I'm used to philosophy in the forms of like stories and allegories and anecdotes and things like that. But you were saying that this is more analytical, but then it's also part of a story. So
yeah, within the story, the central narrative of the Bhagavad Gita is not through stories. It occurs. This philosophical discussion occurs within a story, but it itself doesn't convey the wisdom through it. There are no stories within the Bhagavad Gita. It's a serious question-answer discussion. There are many different ways in which wisdom can be conveyed. Sometimes it is through philosophy. Sometimes it's through stories, allegories. Sometimes it's through metaphors. Generally, we could say philosophical wisdom. There are many ways to convey it, but one of them is through stories. So you could use it. You could use real stories. There could be mythical stories. Mythical means there's some reality to it, but a lot of myths have been added to it. There could be some completely allegorical stories where there's no reality to it, but there's only symbolism. Now, philosophical wisdom could also be conveyed through some discourse that somebody just speaks, and then it could also be conveyed through discussions. So Socratic dialogues are a well-known way of conveying. Now, Socrates, as far as I have read him, he doesn't use too many stories to convey his points. He has reasoned discussions. So the Gita, of course, the Gita is spoken before Socrates, but from the Western perspective, the Gita's mood of question answers is like the Socratic method of discussion. Okay. So let me quickly go through the remaining questions. So now, who is speaking it? So that is, we discussed what when, and where. So now if you consider who, the Gita is a part of a bigger discussion. And that bigger discussion goes on between two characters. There is a king named Dhritarashtra, and he's asking questions to his minister. So Dhritarashtra is having a discussion with his minister assistant Sanjay. And that is the context from which the Gita begins. Now Dhritarashtra and Sanjay, they are having a discussion about the entire war. What happens before the war, the arrangement before it, what happens during the war, all that is narrated. So this is a much bigger discussion. Within that, the discussion of the discussion of the core Gita discussion is between Krishna and Arjuna. So Arjuna is asking the questions and Krishna is answering the questions. So actually this discussion will start in the second chapter. But before that, there will be speaking, Arjuna will speak, Krishna will speak in this chapter itself. So the main protagonists in the Bhagavad-gita are Krishna and Arjuna. And that their discussion from a historical textual perspective is given as a part of the discussion with Dhritarashtra and Sanjay. And simultaneously, Krishna is said to be present in every heart as the divinity, and Arjuna represents humanity. So these non-literal aspects of the Gita we'll be discussing later. So the Gita could be said to, this is one level of conversation, second level of conversation, and third level of conversation is what can happen within the human heart. As we internalize the wisdom of the Bhagavad-gita, then the words of Krishna from the Gita, they start getting reflected from within our heart. They become a core of part of who we are. And so the Gita in that sense becomes a timeless conversation. So this is a time-bound, a time-specific conversation, which happened at a particular time. But the Gita is also meant to inspire this timeless conversation between humanity and divinity within every human heart.
Wow. So wait, so you're saying that there's two conversations going on during the Gita, Dhritarashtra and Sanjaya, and Krishna and Arjuna, and it kind of flips back and forth. But in the bigger context of it, we as readers and students can understand the context through this relationship of divinity and humanity of the human heart, you're saying?
Yes, perfect. So we all can, this conversation can become like an inner guide for us, inner compass for us as we internalize it. And then now the why question I will leave for the next session, because that will flow into the Gita. Now how the Gita is spoken? The Gita is spoken primarily through, as I said, discussion. It is called samvada, that's the word in Sanskrit. So there's a discussion primarily between Krishna and Arjuna, and it's in the form of question answers. So we could say that the Gita has there's one question which Arjuna asks in the start of the Gita, and the entire Gita is the answer to that question. So this question will come in the second chapter, 7th verse. And then while answering these questions, while Krishna is answering the questions, then there are some other questions also Arjuna asks, and they may be of varying lengths. And those questions are also gradually answered. And then toward the end of the Gita, it's like after the core discussion is over, there are some questions related with the core discussion, and there are some miscellaneous questions which are also asked. And in this way, the Gita extends over 18 chapters. And these chapters are of varying length. The shortest is 20 verses. The 12th and 15th chapters are 20 verses. And the longest chapter is 78 verses, which is the 18th chapter. And closely following it is the second chapter, which is 72 verses. So the Gita is primarily driven as a discussion between Krishna and Arjuna. So totally, there are 17 questions which Arjuna asks in the Gita. And along with that, there is one question which Krishna asks at the end. So we could consider that to be, there's a symmetry. There are 18 chapters and there are 18 questions in the core dialogue of the Bhagavad-gita. So should I summarize? Any clarifications?
That's great. Thank you.
Please.
So let's look at, so we discussed several questions today of the Bhagavad-gita. So what is the Bhagavad-gita? So we discussed how it is a traditionally considered a song of God. It's a hugely influential book within the Indian tradition. So it is partly like the Bible in the sense that because it's so influential for that particular religious tradition, but it's also a part of the essence of a vast library of books, and its mood is not exactly as didactic as it is discursive. It's more of a discussion. It's so in that sense, it's a slight difference. It's been inspired. It's inspired many thinkers across the world to discuss it. Then so it's quite ancient by whatever definition we use. The tradition considers it about five millennia ago. And more important than the exact date of wisdom is going on a date with wisdom. Then, so where is it spoken? So it is spoken on a battlefield named Kurukshetra, which is mentioned. Battlefield at a place called Kurukshetra, which is mentioned in the first verse of the Gita. And it is spoken, is a part of a much bigger text called the Mahabharata, which is, the Gita is very small, 700 verses. The Mahabharata is huge. And it is, both of them are discussions about dharma, which is you could say, the right thing to do, the meaningful thing to do, the thing which will bring value and meaning to our life. And who? We discuss the Gita is a discussion between Dhritarashtra and Sanjay. It's a discussion between Arjuna and Krishna. And it's a discussion between humanity and divinity at a ultimate. This is what it is meant to inspire. At a historical level, this is the core discussion between Krishna and Arjuna that's considered the heart of the Gita. And how is it? It is primarily a QA session, question answer session, which is driven by Arjuna's questions and Krishna's answers. So there are 17 questions which Arjuna asks over the 18 chapters of the Gita. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you.